It was coming from the dry creek bed. It was incredibly loud. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It shook me awake. I woke up immediately. It wasn't something I was expecting to hear. Right after the first guttural call, I heard footsteps right next to my tent. Right next to it, within 5 to 10 feet. I was pretty alarmed, completely awake. I knew exactly what was going on. And then the guttural call, whatever it was that was in the creek bed, had moved down that creek bed probably 100 feet in a very short amount of time, maybe 5 seconds. You know, time kind of escapes you in a situation like that.
All right, Bigfoot Society, you've got the privilege of talking to two gentlemen tonight from the Pacific Northwest. We've got Mr. Tanner Hoskins and Kelly from Pacific Northwest Bigfoot Search. I've been wanting to chat with you guys for a while. I'm glad we finally were able to get it all rocking and rolling. But Tanner, do you mind sharing any information that the audience will want to know before we get chatting about the Pacific Northwest Bigfoot Search?
Oh, native Oregonian. Been here, like I said, 30 years. Background is in private security, investigations, studying right now for conservation, looking at forestry and wildlife conservation degree. Proud dad of one kid, and that's about all I got that I can think of at the top of my head.
Nice. And Kelly, you can go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Kelly, originally from Montana, raised on a ranch out there. Moved to the Northwest about 20 years ago, the Oregon area. Been back and forth here. Yeah, spent most of my life in the woods one way or another. Did 6 years in the infantry. I've hunted and fished. Just love to be outside, and have a couple of boys that join me on my excursions up to the hills all the time. And yeah, that's about it. I'm nothing too special. I'm an electrical contractor by trade. Working good profession, enjoy my life.
Hey, that's all you can ask for. Tanner, what is the Pacific Northwest Bigfoot Search, and how did it all come about?
It actually came about because Kelly had an experience with something in the woods that he could not identify. I've known about Bigfoot stories and Bigfoot lore all since growing up. My great grandma used to talk about hide behinds. Her family were loggers in Orfino, Idaho, Grangemont area. But hearing that lore my whole life, and then it fell off until Kelly came to work one day and said, "Hey, I had something come through camp that I did not recognize." And we immediately, probably 2 weeks later, went back to the area just trying to see what was going on and see if we could encounter something. And honestly, it was just born from there. Just a bunch of friends trying to make sense of a weird, strange coincidence that happened in the woods.
And Kelly, since you're here, which is awesome, that's usually not the case when a gentleman says, my buddy had a thing where he saw something in the woods, but you're actually here with us. Do you mind sharing what happened from your point of view?
No, not at all. I've learned to enjoy telling this story. It was pretty hard in the beginning, but we're also missing one of our folks here. He couldn't make it this evening. His name's Mike. He was on that trip where this took place. And I know Mike back from 20 years. Him and I were in the Army together. Like I said, known each other forever, trust each other completely. And he was there. Like I said, I wish he could have been here for this one, but for this podcast, but he's not here tonight. June 18th of 2020, my boys and I and their cousin, we all went up to an area called Forlorn Lakes. It's situated between Mount Adams and Mount St. Helens. It's an area I had camped quite a few times before. I found it just by going and driving way up in the mountains. And as far as remote goes, I know there's different versions of remote all across this country. Being from Montana, we have a whole nother version of remote. It's incredibly rural. There is nothing out there. People are like, it's remote. The Walmart's 30 miles away. It's not like that there. And it's not like that where we go either. There's nothing out there. You're an hour and a half away from the closest town. And if the town has gas, you're lucky. So it's good country to get up into. There's these little finger lakes called Forlorn Lakes, and little campsites around them. But I'd done some exploring over the years, and I found a spot that I really wanted to get into. And it was a creek bed that ran down way above Forlorn Lakes, probably about a mile and a half up above it, off the road. You would pass it and never know it was there. When I say road, it's not much of a road there, really. It heads up into a trailhead is all it leads to. The boys and I were lucky enough to grab that spot. My buddy Mike and his girlfriend ended up joining us later in that day. They knew where it was at. I was able to drop a point. They were able to find it. So that night, set up camp, had the 3 boys with me. Their ages were like 11, 7, right in that area, all 3 of them. And I ended up going to bed pretty early. The dry creek bed right next to us, it was dry. I was hoping there'd be water running through it, as I had seen before, but there wasn't any, just pools of water, and the boys had been playing in them that evening. It's just a real beautiful place surrounded by huge cedars and pine trees, a nice little camp ring. It's not a civilized camp spot at all. It's off the beaten path. Huckleberries were everywhere. You could just, right next to your tent, just grab them off the bush and eat them. It was fantastic. So the boys and I went to bed pretty early that night. We did the typical hot dogs and s'mores type of thing. And Mike and his girlfriend, they managed to polish off my bottle of Pendleton, which was pretty nice of them. So they were up a little bit longer than we were. Anyway, go to bed, and not exactly sure at what time it was that I heard the first sound. And I think Mike best described it later on as it sounded like a guttural washboard. And it was coming from the dry creek bed. It was incredibly loud. I've never heard anything like it in my life. It shook me awake. I woke up immediately. It wasn't something I was expecting to hear. If anything, I expected to hear a raccoon. If that, there's not even raccoons up there. It's too high. Right after the first guttural call, I heard footsteps right next to my tent, right next to it, within 5 to 10 feet. I was pretty alarmed, completely awake. I knew exactly what was going on. And then the guttural call, whatever it was that was in the creek bed, had moved down that creek bed probably 100 feet in a very short amount of time, maybe 5 seconds. Time kind of escapes you in a situation like that. And then the footsteps continued on. I think I heard the guttural call that first night, I want to say 3 times. But there was a small trail that went right by my tent, 5 feet from it, and connected up with the dry creek bed, which was right next to us. And whatever it was that was walking next to my tent went down that trail. Now you're talking about a trail of hundreds, thousands of years of dry pine needles stacked on top of each other. You couldn't track an elephant herd through there. There's nothing to track. You could drive your truck across it and not leave a track. It's just dry pine needle beds. But I could feel that thing walking, and I could hear whatever it was, the huckleberries bushes brush up against its legs as it walked. I immediately as that thing crossed my tent, past my tent, I immediately called out for Mike. I yelled, "Mike, there's something in the camp." I yelled it as loud as I could because I was terrified. I'm not going to lie. I was really scared. Mike, he just mumbles something. Looking back, it's funny, but I'm jumping out of the tent. I'm grabbing my 12 gauge. I'm stepping on these 3 little boys as I'm doing it. They didn't hear a thing. I ended up stepping on the youngest one, the cousin, and right out of a movie, he screams, looking right at me while asleep. Oh, it was terrifying. It was just a disaster of me trying to get out of that tent while being terrified of something outside my tent. It was right out of nightmares and comics all at once. I jump out of the tent, and Mike's girlfriend, I think she had left the lantern on. She wanted a night light, so she left her lantern on. It was barely burning. And Mike's tent was right next to mine. I said, "Mike, there's something just came through," and I explained it. I was shaking. I was scared to death. Looking back, I was scared, but I never racked around in my shotgun. Which is bizarre for me. So being an ex-soldier, you'd think you'd be more ready than that. And clearly I wasn't. Anyway, I'm telling him about it, and he says, "Hey, man, I didn't hear a thing. Sorry." I'm like, "Okay." I got my act together after about 10 minutes, and I went back to bed. The next morning, I got up, and I telling everyone around the campfire, this happened. This thing came through. And I said to Mike, "Mike, there was at least 2 of them. There's one in the dry creek bed. And there was one right in camp. And I said, whatever, it was big and it was two-legged. I know it was. I know what elk sound like walking by me. I grew up for 3 years at the north entrance of Yellowstone with my dad in Gardner, Montana. I know animals. I know bears. I know elk. I know deer. I know antelope. I know cats. I'm comfortable around all of it. But this thing, it was a completely different situation. I've never heard anything like that in my life. So I think they got tired of hearing me talk about it. And I didn't want to ruin the day. I'm like, all right, I got these 3 little boys up here that want to do fishing all day. They want to go swimming. So I let it go. And Mike, I remember him saying, he said, man, I believe you. I just didn't hear anything. I'm like, okay. So I let it go. We went down to the local lake. The Goose Lake is what it's called. It's a great little fishing hole, canoeing, kayaking, and it's got some pretty cool history in it too. People can look it up, but there's some, and I've been looking for them for years, and that's why I always like to go up there. There's some handprints in the lava beds up there. They look 6,000 or 8,000 years old. Yeah, and they could date it because it's the last lava that went through there. There's handprints and footprints in there. They have a mold of them down at the ranger station. It's pretty cool. So I'm always down there looking for that and letting the boys fish. We had a great day. Everyone was worn out by the end of it because we spent all day out in the sun. We went back to camp, and everyone turned in pretty early that day. No one was interested in finishing off another bottle of Pendleton, even if we didn't have one or not. Went to bed, and it was clear I wasn't going to sleep well. That thing was still on my mind, but I had dropped it. I didn't want to keep bringing it up because you start to tell yourself you're crazy. You're like, this didn't happen. Move on. There's no way. I don't know. It's a different feeling. So it went to sleep, and I didn't know what time it was at that time, but I heard it again. Woke up, and it was that guttural washboard sound. It was so loud in that quiet of the woods. It's almost like someone setting off a car alarm right next to you while you're sleeping. It was that loud. And once again, it was in the creek bed. Not exactly maybe the same location, but it was in the creek bed. And immediately I yelled, Mike, it's back. And all I heard him say, and I think this is what he said, I hear it. And as he's saying that, he's racking around in his 45. I'm a little more queued up the second night. I'm a little more prepared. So I jump out of my tent without tripping over 3 kids and causing myself a heart attack. I get out of the tent. Mike is laying down, facing up towards my truck. And he says, it's up there. And he's searching for his glasses. He was asking his girlfriend, hey, give me my glasses, because he's trying to actually see in the dark. We're standing there in the exact same position I was the night before, except for him awake, pointed up towards my truck, laying down halfway outside his tent, still laying on the ground. And I say to his girlfriend, I said, what time is it? It's 3:06. I remember that very specifically. She's like, it's 3:06. And I said to Mike, Mike, 2 legs or 4, because he's shook. Like, he doesn't know up from down, but I need to prove to myself that I'm not crazy. I said, Mike, 2 legs or 4? He's 2. I said, how big was it? He's like, it's really effing big. And I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy. So we cleared camp a couple of times, and he's yelling into the woods. He's like, nobody better be messing with us out there. And I already knew there was nobody messing with us out there. These aren't microphones in the trees. These aren't some 400 or 500 pound guy stomping around out in the woods. It's not happening where we're at. There's no way. You'd have to be a lunatic to be out there. There's no way. So we cleared camp a couple of times, and I said to myself, there's no way we're sleeping in this tent again tonight. And the boys were awake, and I yelled at the oldest. I said, hey, start loading up blankets in the truck. So they are moving stuff to my pickup, and my youngest, all I remember was seeing him as a little white streak running across the woods, running to the truck as fast as he could. And I thought to myself, whatever's out there, he's too far away from me. Like right now, he's 30 feet away. It was entertaining, humorous, and terrifying all at the same time. Anyway, Mike and his girlfriend slept in their car that night, and it was a convertible. And here I am in a huge power wagon. I slept fine. Yeah, pretty sure they were we called them bait. And the next morning we got up and Mike kept trying to retrace the steps up to his tent. And he's like, it was right here. And he couldn't re-mimic the weight of it. There's no way. Mike's about 180 pounds, I'd say 170, 180 pounds. I think there was another one, he says, on the woods on the other side. So he thinks there was 3, whatever it was, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, whatever it was, there was 3 of them. Me, I only heard the 2. I heard the one in the creek bed and I heard the one next to me. And I think, if my recollection's right, I remember hearing the second one walking the second night also. We packed up camp and had a good story. I came back to where we were working and told Tanner about it. And him and I were friends at that point, but we weren't. We were more friend acquaintances, work friends at that point. I told him about it and he ran with it. He's like, man, this is amazing. This happened. And it took me about a year to really wrap my head around it because I know what I heard. I'm not a complete greenhorn in the woods. I'm actually pretty solid. Mike and I were soldiers together in the Montana National Guard. We're not a couple of yahoos. We know our way around, probably more than most. We can track, we can hunt. I've had grizzlies come through my camp. I never even ran to my truck during that. I slept in the tent. Wasn't afraid of it, but this was different.
Tanner, follow up for you. So immediately what I'm thinking, have you guys ever received a report that has that same type of sound mentioned?
So I've only had one report out of about the 80 that our website has received in the last 3 years where somebody mentioned that it sounded like a stick running along a picket fence. It was just...
That's exactly right. That's what it was, but on such a massive scale. The sound he just made was pretty accurate, but with a higher pitch to it almost. There's nothing that I know of that makes any sound like that. I know some cats, they make some strange sounds. Bobcats especially, they make the damnedest sounds, but it wasn't that. There's no way.
That's incredible. And listeners, you, especially on YouTube, for some reason, the YouTube listeners are just probably because there's a comment feature and they can rattle stuff off and it's easier than the podcast to get that feedback. But guys, gals, if you have heard the same sound, put something in the comments because I want to know. But how can they contact you, Tanner, Kelly, directly to let you know, hey, I've heard this, but it was like in North Carolina?
You can go to pnwbigfootsearch.com. As soon as you get to the website, our front page is file a report. If you want to remain anonymous, you can. I would love to follow up with you. I won't sell your information. I'm not doing that. I'm trying to create a database of everybody that's had these encounters. So we can piece together what this possibly was. I've heard stories from everywhere and of everything, people that think they're Wendigos or whatever you want to call it. If you have information, I would love to hear from you. And if you're comfortable, I would love to speak with you.
I have something to add if you would.
Oh, go right ahead, Kelly. Yeah.
So the first night we were camping there, we were not responsible campers. The boys had eaten some hot dogs, half-eaten hot dogs. There was half-eaten s'mores, and they were all thrown into a trash bag bin that I bring camping right at the end of the pickup. At the end of the night, I was tired. I went to bed, and Mike and his girlfriend were clearly not going to be much use to anybody. And so that food sat out. Whatever was coming through wasn't interested in food. Coming through, it just wasn't. A bear would have rummaged around, but there was just no way. That sound was nothing like that. So what I'm saying is, if there was an animal interested in coming to our camp, that's not what they came for.
That's even weirder because it's if they weren't coming for that.
We've done lots of research on this now, and Tanner's done an amazing job on this site. In fact, I didn't even know he was doing the site. 6 months later, all of a sudden, I'm co-founder. Hell, I didn't even know. I didn't even know I was part of this. I was just a guy going out camping, but we became really good friends through this process. And we go out and do these things, but he's put together an amazing missing persons database that overlays with Bigfoot sightings, vocalizations. You can see it all right through the entire Cascade Range. It's incredible. He's got tons of information on there. We all like to geek out and look at this stuff. If people want to, just take a look at the site. It's amazing. The overlays he's done with missing persons and Bigfoot sightings, vocalizations, they lay right on top of each other.
I love also how you have Bigfoot mapping project. Scott is great, and I'm glad that you put that in there. But then your own map as well, and we'll chat about that later. But I'm curious, have you guys found that you keep focusing on a certain area or region of the Pacific Northwest, or you're going all over the place?
So far, what we find ourselves doing is people getting us back into the Cascade Range. Every time I try to do anything, it's the Oregon Cascades, the Washington Cascades, especially the upper Cascades, and then the Olympic area, the Olympic Peninsula. But there's places in Idaho I would love to check out. I'd like to check out the Montana Bitterroots, but every report we get stems from the entire length of the Cascade Range. Through
your research, have you ever thought that all these reports are coming from this one Cascades area? What makes that such a hot spot for Bigfoot?
Honestly, if you follow the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to the Canadian border and through it, every reporting goes through the Sierras from Southern California all the way up. And I think it's just an area where if there is a town in between, like a migration corridor or something, these things are able to ride these ridge lines, like they call them ridge walkers in certain cultures. I think they're just using that either as a migration corridor, or people that are camping or hiking or backpacking or just stumbling across things that are up there that most people don't pay attention to or notice, maybe if they're closer to town. Because most of the people that are out where we get reports at are hunters that have been in the backcountry. They've taken the Pacific Crest Trail and then made a trail to some other area. So I'm really not sure, other than that is all I can think of, is that amounts or that huge section of land that anything could traverse and get thousands of miles.
Kelly, has there been a report you guys have taken over the years where you took the report, is fascinating, and it sucked you guys right in, and you ended up getting involved with something that was maybe a little bit more outside of what you thought it was?
I think I'll hand that one over to Tanner. He's the one that takes these reports in.
We had some firefighters from somewhere in Washington.
Did something come
through camp. It would not come close enough to the fire, but they could hear it moving through the brush. And then they heard multiple surrounding the fire area. But they said that it got close enough to camp that they thought they could smell something. And whatever it was, they swore was on two legs. But there was 4 or 5 firefighters that sent in that report, and they said it would not get close to the fire so that you could see its eyes, but you could tell that it was watching everything they were doing. So they all actually, in the report that I have, I think they all moved away from the fire to try to get better eyes out into the darkness. And then they got too spooked and they all just went back to the fire and loaded it up with wood and stayed up all night until it was time to pack out.
I don't blame them, man. Wow, that is wild. And these firefighter guys, so these guys are used to being out there in the woods and dealing with all sorts of stuff. That is wild, man.
One of the reports we've got, the report that we got about the guy with the guttural call, something similar to what I heard. He's a deputy on the coast. He's a deputy sheriff, and he was with his son when they heard this. The report database is pretty in-depth. So these aren't just I don't mean to be crude, but a bunch of yahoos running around the woods, making stuff up, throwing fairy dust up in the air and hoping something sticks. These are woodsmen. These are firefighters. These are veterans. These are hunters. They're reporting these things into us. These are reputable people that are coming across these things, and it's not like they're looking for this experience. This just happens. So it's pretty interesting.
I'm sure a few people's ears perked up when you were talking about missing persons and Bigfoot earlier. That's a hot topic. It's been a hot topic for years upon years. Can you talk me through how did that become a part of Pacific Northwest Bigfoot Search? Was there a time where you were like, hey, this is just matching up, all these people are going missing?
So it became an idea when I started the Instagram page and Facebook page, and a guy reached out and said that we were in an area where one of his friends disappeared a long time ago, and he just wanted us to keep an eye out for clothing or just something of his that might be able to point somebody in the right direction. And then from there, I looked up his case, and then I started realizing there was other missing people. Looked up David Politis's. I came across the Can-Am Project. Started reviewing his books, reading through them, watching his documentaries. And honestly, it's just that one guy just asking, hey, you guys are out in that area more often than I get to be. Just keep an eye out. And all of a sudden you start noticing that there's clusters of missing people in these certain areas. And as I was already creating the Bigfoot map, I started mapping where these last known locations were, or approximately where they were. And using that, I accidentally opened them both at the same time on Google Earth. And all of a sudden you saw where people had full encounters or heard things or found footsteps was close proximity to where somebody disappeared at. And it's all throughout the same corridors, the same paths. It's a trip to really think about. I still don't believe 100% that Sasquatch is kidnapping people. I can't say that's what's happening, but it's a weird coincidence.
So the area that we tend to go to, especially where I like to go to, is up in the Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams region. It's huge. It's very extensive, and it is covered in lava tubes. I found a geological survey, I think it was what you would call it, of all the original lava tubes they found. There are thousands and thousands of miles of lava tubes that shoot through that entire region. So if something was pretty good at cruising, they could get through that area in day or night. You never even know it. And I'm talking about an area the size of some states. There's nothing out there. It's massive. And it's pretty impressive. There could be something 20 feet from you where we're at. You wouldn't even be able to see it. It's that thick with foliage at times. It's pretty good country. As far as the missing persons thing, everybody's got a different opinion on this. Like, what is it? How can it be? How can something exist up in these mountains that people see, credible people see it and hear it? How come we haven't ran across? The question is the bones and this, that, and the other. And I don't have any answers because I don't even know what came through camp. I just know the facts are it was huge and it was two-legged and they were getting communication and they were using that dry creek bed as a route. Everybody's got a different stance on what this thing is. I think even Tanner and I don't 100% agree. He tends to lean more towards it's existing up there all the time, which is a huge theory of it. And I go towards the Ron Moorhead direction. These things may come and go in and out of a plane because I just don't know how a hunter hasn't dropped one. How can a hunter not drop one with this 308 by now? Doesn't make sense to me.
The cool thing about the website is you can actually read the reports on there from what I've seen. And I'm guessing this might be some stuff that you're not seeing on BFRO or these other sites. You also have actual bios of the missing people, which is very cool. That would be such an interesting thing because it's a topic you have to treat very delicately, I think, because a lot of these people, they still have relatives where the relatives are probably still alive. They may even be trying to still deal with this. Have you ever had situations like that cross into like someone contact you and be like, hey, I noticed you're looking for my relative or anything of that nature?
Nope. Outside of that first guy asking us to keep an eye out, I haven't had anybody really reach out. I've taken a few of the cases that are local to me, like the Sean Higgins case in Southern Oregon, the Jeremy Childress case out of Tillamook. Those are a little bit more personal to me because they're easier for me to get to and go investigate. They're in my neck of the woods. And so we're coming up on the 7th year anniversary of Sean Higgins' disappearance. And he's a guy that knew the area like the back of his hand. He had been up there his entire life and one day went for a 1-hour hike and disappeared, never seen again. And I know his family is still looking for closure. And that's something that by October, I would like to get down into that area and at least try my best for a few nights, if not close to a week, and see what we pull up. And there's just a few cases I've taken to heart, and I just want to help provide closure if we can. And what I'm doing with the website right now by posting these people's bios and their clothing descriptions is if I'm not in the area and you see our website, at least you have an idea of what you could possibly be looking for. Or if you stumble across a personal article of someone's, you'll be able to tell if it was possibly belonging to someone in that area that's vanished. It's all about bringing awareness.
I love it when we have these pursuits where we're trying to figure out what Bigfoot is, or we're trying to find the truth. But when those can intersect with something where it really affects someone's lives, that is cool. And it seems like you guys have found a perfect intersection with that. And hats off to you for sure. Have you ever experienced a situation where you're in the woods and things got a little bit too intense and you're like, maybe I could do check, please? Or Kelly, you're an outdoor hunter. You've already said, are you just like all the time? Give me that action. I want to go.
Yeah. I've never thought to myself, I want to be out there. That's it. I never have ran across anything that made me, was the only incident in my life that made me second guess everything I thought about the woods. And once that happens, that's that.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm an adrenaline junkie, but
I also know my limits. So I'm not trying to get myself hurt, especially now that I have a kid at home that needs me and a wife that loves me. But I am an adrenaline junkie. So when I get these reports, I'm chopping at the bit to hike into exact location where those guys were and put myself in a position similar to theirs where we can get something to happen, because Kelly had his experience and I'm honestly as nervous as I am to have my own or maybe see one of these things. I'm also very excited for the possibility of it.
If you'll let me interject on something again,
Sure.
please, because things come to me, my thoughts come to me as we continue on with this discussion. So 2 weeks after that incident happened, Tanner and I, and what was it, two other guys, we went up to the same exact location. I'm like, come on, guys, let's load up. I got to experience this again. I have to understand this. So we went up there and we had a great time. Just a bunch of guys drinking around the fire, relaxing. Just like it should be, out in the middle of nowhere. It was fantastic. But it was, I had to do it. And I had to do it because I love the woods. And if I didn't get back into it right away, there was no way I was going to get back up there that year, or even maybe the next, because it scared the hell out of me so much. And in fact, I didn't sleep neither night we were up there. Yeah, that's never happened. I usually camp without a tent, just a sleeping bag next to the fire, backpacking in. And so we went up 2 weeks later to the exact same location. I have camped at the exact location since then with my wife, just her and I, which was a feat to get her there, but she went. So it's a pretty cool place.
hats off to your wife, because I'm sure
Yeah.
she's heard the story a few times and you're like, hey,
She
you want to
has.
go check it out?
She doesn't want to hear it anymore. She doesn't want to hear it. But she admits it's beautiful. It's incredible there. She loved it.
Guys, I talked to a lot of witnesses, and recently the witnesses I've been talking to, and listeners, feel free to contact me and I'd love to have a chat with you. But I've talked to a few guys where they are experiencing Bigfoot on their property and things are intense. As researchers, as guys that are in the field, do you have any advice that people that might be experiencing a Bigfoot on their property, they're out in the woods, the creature's messing around, what might be some advice for these people that are a little bit freaked out?
Honestly, we really, it's, I got to choose my words a little carefully. We don't actually know this species. If it is a species, we don't actually know anything about it. We have assumptions. People have their ideas, their educational guesses, but really we don't know anything about it. So I can't tell you to stand your ground. I can't tell you to not run away. I can't tell you to, I don't know what you're supposed to do. If you feel like you're in danger, do the thing that needs to get you out of there. If something's happening on your property, invite people that you trust to come out and check out your property. People that are looking into this, that are not trying to do it for fame or fortune or anything. They're doing it for the right reasons, and invite them out, because there's sections here in the northwest of Oregon that have had sightings on properties, but because they're private property or they're owned by large timber companies, we can't really investigate.
I can say from my experience that looking back, it's pretty cool. It's not cool the first time when it's happening. There's nothing fun about jumping out of your tent, because that's the stuff right out of nightmares and horror stories, hearing something walk next to your tent. That's exactly what we never want to hear when we're camping. It's like you go to sleep, you're like, cool, I'll wake up in the morning. You don't want to hear that. But looking back, it's not too bad. It was life-changing. I'll give it that. It's a life-changing experience. And I look at the comedy in it. I'm stepping on the kids as I'm jumping out of the tent with a 12 gauge and watching Mike run around in his skivvies yelling at the woods. And you got to have some fun with it too. Otherwise you dig deep into it too far and you might not want to go down that rabbit hole. So you got to have a little bit of fun with it.
I think that's great advice. First, Tanner, you handled that expertly. That's a tricky one. I realized how tricky it was as I was saying it. And Kelly, it's a good reminder that, so this is a topic where you guys, you can get in really deep and you got to have a lifeline. Keep that rope there so you pull yourself out a little bit, because you don't want to be, as Henry Franzoni says, going too far down the road to Siatko. The curse of Bigfoot's a real thing, and it might affect your life a little bit too much. So keep that in mind, squatchers out there. Guys, this has been an awesome interview. You taking it seriously. You have your stuff together, and you're also keeping an eye out for people that have gone missing to see how you can help with that as well. It's just very, very cool. It's been a fun interview, and I want to give you the chance. Any closing thoughts you might have?
We're still going out. We go out all the time. We've been out. I've been out twice or 3 times this year. You've been out twice.
Yeah.
We still go up to these places. Right now, we're still fighting the snow here. We've had really warm temperatures, and last weekend I got buried in my power wagon just trying to get into a Canyon Creek campground where Maureen Kelly went missing in 2013. People can look that up. It's a very bizarre story. I'll let folks dive into that if they want to, but I got buried just trying to get in there. So we're hampered by the weather here somewhat, but we got trips planned all summer long. We're going to be up in those mountains and having a good time. Trying to figure out what's going on, setting up our cameras, enjoying a beer around the fire, and doing some fishing.
My last thing is we put up cameras in October. Kelly was saying we're trying to reach a certain elevation, and my cameras have been out since October and they're still buried under snow. So we have months. We're hoping to get up there last bit of June, maybe early July. But as far as I've been told, there's still 3 feet of snow around where those cameras are. So we will be one of the first groups to blow through a snowbank and get up there and retrieve those.
Tanner, what's the best way for listeners to keep up to date with what Pacific Northwest Bigfoot Search is doing?
If you want to follow us on social media, either I'm better at Instagram doing stories, at least if I don't have time to update the website. Facebook, you can also follow on there. Anything I post to Instagram will also be on Facebook. But also just the website, following us on YouTube. We try to post what we're doing, whether it's the hikes that we're going on, our adventures, trying to make it into certain destinations, just trying to show people what we're doing so you can see that we're not just talking about it. We're going full send and putting ourselves in a little bit of risk. Yeah, just follow us on social media if you want to. Send me an email if you need to. If something comes up, it's thoskins@pnwbigfootsearch.com. That's my direct. But yeah, I'd appreciate it. I appreciate anybody that wants to follow along and support us with it.
That's awesome. And Kelly, is that the same way to keep up to date with what you're doing as well?
I'm not going to lie. There's no way to keep up to date with me on this side. This is all through Tanner, man. This is all through Tanner. He's the techie one. I build things. That's what I do.
All right.
I didn't even know I was co-founder for 6 months, but and he's done a great job with it. No, everything goes through Tanner on this. I'm the guy that gets out in the woods, and Tanner is too, by all means. But yeah, I'm more of a boots on the ground type of guy, not a communication guy.
I love that. You guys have a really cool team dynamic going on. It's awesome. I would recommend all listeners definitely keep up to date with what these guys are doing. They've got some good stuff going on, I can tell, but all the links are going to be in the show notes. But Kelly, Tanner, thank you so much for coming on tonight. It's been a fun chat.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much. This was fun. Thanks.
If you'd like to support Bigfoot Society with a special one-time donation, you can head over to our Buy Me a Coffee page. The link will be in the show notes. We'd like to shout out this week, especially Henry Franzoni and Anonymous, both for buying us a few coffees. This will be especially helpful on our trip out to Monster Fest next week. As you know, that airport food gets kind of pricey. The link will be in the show notes to the Buy Me a Coffee page if you'd like to help support with a one-time donation as well. Become a supporting member of the Bigfoot Society podcast by going to www.patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society and receive extra episodes and early ad-free episodes as well. If you've got a personal Bigfoot encounter you would like to submit for me to share on the podcast, please head on over to www.bigfootsocietypodcast.com. There you'll find the Share Your Bigfoot Encounter form a little lower on the page, and please take a minute to share as many details as you can. Please state if the encounter is anonymous or what name you would like associated with the encounter. And as always, thanks for listening.